What's up, guys? Today we're fixing one of the main problems on E36s and BMWs in general, and that's the oil filter housing gasket. They wear down, they cause leaks, they'll go all over your belt, they'll pour everywhere, and next thing you know, you're chasing a leak you can't find because everything's covered in oil. If you see right here, this is all deteriorated, probably hasn't been changed ever in the life of the vehicle. That's fine, that's why we're doing it now. Right here, this goes into the side of the motor. There's an O-ring, or what should have been an O-ring. It's basically just plastic now, deteriorated. So you definitely want to get a new O-ring for that to replace while you're in there. That way it can create a proper seal to the block. Let's get into it. All right, starting off, taking the stock intake off. If you have a stock intake, this sits at the front right here. Two little bolts right there. They were 10 mils for me, and that comes off. Now your stock filter will be sitting right here, and it's easy to take that off. You would just take all four of the little clips around it off, and then that slide out of there, and then be able to work it out. The air filter housing right there sits right in this little corner, and it's 210 mils on that side and that side, and then you can kind of work it out. Now I'm trying to do it without taking my coolant line off, my upper radiator hose, which I should be able to. Next thing was the belt. Imagine it's routed through here, wrapped around this tensioner. First thing I did on my car, it is a T50. So I put the T50 in there. If I can get it to focus. Put the T50 in there and pulled it towards the passenger side, and I was able to break it loose enough to pull the belt off. Next thing you'd want to do is this idler pulley right here. On my car, it is a 16 millimeter. And then boom, that comes right off. Next thing you want to do, I took one of the bolts off for my power steering reservoir. I'm going to do the other one as well, just so I can move it out of the way some. Because the alternator, there's a couple bolts. This bottom one, you won't be able to get out with the reservoir right there. So you want to take the bolts off and then move this out of the way. That way you could slide those bolts off. So the two 16 mil bolts will now slide right out. I have the power steering reservoir moved out of the way. I just moved it up under this bracket and put a little zip tie so where it wouldn't mess with the hoses too much. So now I want to lift this up a little and pull it forward so I have a little bit more access to right back here under this little flap is, I believe, either a 12 or a 13 millimeter bolt to take the wire off. It does get stuck. If you see, it's just pivoting, the bottom's kind of stuck. You could take a little flathead screwdriver and just kind of pry up on it. Carefully not to mess with any of the pulleys or any of the hoses or anything down here, but it's on there tight so you can kind of swivel it, but you just want to kind of pry on it some. Play with it back and forth. It's a little finesse, pulling up with one hand using the flathead underneath, pries it right up. Here, as you see, the wires, they look a little stretched, so you have to be careful. But there's just a little 12 millimeter bolt right here. And once you take that off, then this whole little cover with the wires will come right off, and then you'll have the alternator out. I took my alternator off. I didn't know that the little blue wire was also down there, connected by a little 10 millimeter bolt. If yours is like mine and it's crushed like that, you're gonna have to bend it back some to be able to get the socket on, but it's not super hard to do. Next, you're gonna wanna take this tensioner off, this little plate right here that holds the alternator bracket, I guess. There is, looks like one bolt right there on the front, which hopefully we could work out of there. There is one right here, one there, one in the back, and one on top right there. From there, I believe that whole bracket should just come right off. Maybe this bolt right there, which is covered in oil, of course. But I believe that's all that's needed to take this bracket off, and then we'll be able to get to the housing from there. A little easier than I thought. It was these two bolts back here, these two bolts right here, and that dirty one that was right there. You pull that out. You don't have to mess with that bolt like I thought. Don't even touch it, don't worry about it. But once you take that off, then you can move it out of the way. You can't really do anything else disconnecting it wise unless you want to remove the power steering pump, which I doubt anyone wants to unless you're already working on that. But I'm gonna tie this out of the way. I'm gonna figure out a good place to put it. And then all we have right there is the housing. So I tied the bracket out of the way over here onto the canister with some zip ties. Best tool in the garage. And now what we have left, and I sprayed it off for the sake of video, just the housing. You might see there's one bolt here, one there, one here, one there, and then two right up here. So there's 6 in total. What you gotta be careful of on the back side, if I can get in here and give y'all a good angle with it, there is right here that plug. There's a clip at the bottom that you pull down, and then you should be able to pull it right out. You want to use a flathead. Sometimes they'll come out with just your fingertip prying on it, but most of the time you got to use a little flathead. Don't lose the clip. They're almost impossible to find if you drop them. But once that plug is unplugged, then I'll be able to take the housing off and then show y'all what it looks like. Mind you, before I started all this, I started to let the oil drain, so it's been draining for probably 30 minutes or so now, so it should be hopefully pretty empty. So I'm obviously gonna have some oil come out of where the housing is, but it shouldn't be too bad. All right, I have all 6 of the bolts off. I tapped it very carefully up here with the hammer to start to break it loose. You want to be careful not to just pull it straight up, and I will show you in a second why. It will leak some oil. There you go. It'll pivot back and forth, and then slowly work it off. There you go. This is why you can't just pull it straight up or straight down. Looking at it, I probably want to go get a new O-ring for right there. But this is our old gasket. Non-existent, basically. And I'm pouring oil. Sweet. That's what it looks like when it's off. Right in there is where that O-ring sits, and all around there is where your gasket goes. It is gonna leak some, but if you've been draining your oil for a good while before, you should be fine. The car also hasn't ran in a while, and all the oil is in the oil pan, which is below the filter. So it's not as bad as it would have been. I'm definitely gonna have to go get a new O-ring for this though. So I'll probably grab a new O-ring, and while I'm at it, go grab a new belt, and then I'll come back and install the new gasket and put everything back together. Just got back from the store. I was able to get a new belt. That's the part number. If you have an M44 and you're looking for a belt, it should usually also say it on the side of the belt itself. I ended up, to replace that O-ring, I ended up getting this distributor O-ring assortment. They didn't have any individual ones at AutoZone. I know O'Reilly's and a few other places should have a box of just individual O-rings that you can use. But O-ring, put a little bit of oil on it. I'll put a little bit cleaner oil before I put it back into the vehicle. But got the O-ring replaced now. And you definitely want to make sure you oil up the O-ring itself before you put it into the housing, or before you put it back into the block. That way it doesn't pinch the O-ring that's on there. I'm gonna take a razor blade and scrape all of the old gasket off, making sure that there's none left inside of the housing. And then I can put the new gasket on and start putting it all back together. So got the new gasket on, put that new O-ring, I've tightened it back up. You got to make sure with these you don't over tighten them. If you see, the bolt really only comes this far, so if you go to tighten them too much, it'll be just like your valve cover gasket bolts where they'll just snap. So you want them tight and snug, but you don't want them really over torqued. I don't know from the top of my head the full torque spec or whatever on it, but I know you don't want to over tighten it too much. So I just tightened it till they felt like real snug. And then I ended up spraying everything off. Doesn't look the cleanest, but I'll be able to see if there's an oil leak. So now it's just doing the same steps, but in reverse. So it's the next day and I'm back. It got way too dark last night, so I figured I would finish the video up today. You can see a little bit better in the daylight what it looks like. I sprayed it off, not the best, but enough that if it starts to leak oil, I'll be able to tell. I put that tensioner pulley holder back. I have all the housing bolts tightened. I have all those bolts tightened, so now it's just putting the alternator on, reconnecting those wires, putting the idler pulley back on, and then I could reroute the belt. For the belt, I'm gonna have to take off the little AC belt. There's this tensioner bolt right here, which is, I believe, a 13. Then I could just pull this belt off to slide the new belt behind it. And then from there, it shouldn't be too much longer until I could fill it up with oil and see how it is. As you guys see, I'm finally done. Everything's running, there's no leaks. I was struggling a lot with the tensioner. I ended up having to replace the tensioner. There's two bolts, one above it, one below it. They're Allen keys. But the stock one was stripped so bad that I had to go get a new one to be able to put it on. This tensioner down there for the AC, it's pretty simple. There's like a little Allen that you put in to adjust it, and then you tighten it and loosen it with that 13 mil. Everything's back together, no leaks. Thank you guys for watching the video. Hopefully this helped you out in some way, figuring out how to fix your oil leaks. But like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video.